Good morning. Today we are going to look at the essay The Imam and the Indian by Amitav Ghosh. Amitav Ghosh is an Indian writer who was born in Calcutta and he grew up in three different countries in India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. He studied in Delhi, Oxford, and Alexandria in Egypt. And his major works include The Circle of Reason, The Shadow Lines, In an Antique Land, Dancing in Cambodia, The Calcutta Chromosome, The Glass Palace, The Hungry Tide, The Ibis Trilogy, The Great Derangement, The Imam and the Indian, and a lot more. Amitav Ghosh's main concerns are political and social in nature. For example, in the works like The Hungry Tide and The Gun Island, he looks mainly at the climate change and he seems to be concerned about the relevant environmental and social issues that people face today. Coming to the work The Imam and the Indian, which was published in 2002, the work is a collection of 18 essays. It includes journalistic articles, ethnographic essays, reviews of Arabic literature, translation of Tagore's short story Shudida Pashan, as well as autobiographical pieces, such as an essay recalling Ghosh's experiences following the assassination of Indira Gandhi and a few other lectures. Amitav Ghosh says that the different essays collected or compiled in the Imam and the Indian are heterogeneous by nature. There is nothing which is common to all of these, but he says that it is in this circuitry of imagination that we find connections between all these different kinds of pieces compiled together in the particular work. They cannot be brought under a single theme. They cannot be brought under a single genre. But connections can be made if we look into that. Now, the connections are mainly the issues that he faces or the concerns he has of politics, society, and the cultural aspects. The title essay, The Imam and the Indian, is something which talks about an Indian who faces questions about the cultural features specific to India. This seems to be his autobiographical work because, having studied in Alexandria, he talks about his experiences in Alexandria, doing his doctoral studies there. He he faces a lot of questions about the Indian cultural aspects. We'll move into detail into that as we move forward. The title essay, The Imam and the Indian, has mainly three major characters. As the title itself suggests, we have the Imam of the village, we have the Indian who is the narrator himself, assumably Amitav Ghosh himself, and another character by the name Khamis the rat. There are many other minor characters also. There are a group of women, the village people, and many other characters who come into play, but they only play a minor role. We have these three characters who play the major role in the essay. Now, this essay can be read as descriptive and narrative because the essay runs in the form of a story and there are certain descriptions that are given there. Now, this narrative is set in a village near Alexandria, Egypt, where the narrator goes for his doctoral studies and he lives there. And being a foreigner, the essay talks about how he feels being a foreigner in the of Alexandria. So basically, the narrator says that no matter how much ever he tries to adjust in the new setting, in this foreign land, there are people who look at him with prejudice. There are people who classify him to be of inferior quality based on certain cultural customs that occur in his native land. And in this essay, and in most of the essays that are compiled together in this anthology, his motive seems to be to establish the dubious nature of borders between people, nations, and genres. The geographical borders, yes, but at the same time, how people draw lines, how people build borders in the name of culture, in the name of religion, and many other cultural and societal aspects. Coming to the plot of the essay, so this essay, The Imam and the Indian, talks about his experiences, the narrator's experiences, and uh, conversations with two people, the Imam and Kamis, the rat of the same village. So, Imam is the man who leads the daily prayers in the mosque. He is supposed to be a leading figure in the village, and Ghosh wants to meet him, but he says that he was intrigued by what he had heard about him. So people used to say that he knew a great deal about herbs and old kind of medicine, the traditional kind of Egyptian medicine. And the narrator seems to be interested in knowing more about this traditional medicine from the Imam. The Imam got very little credit in the village because the villagers did not want an Imam who was also a Baba and a healer. And Ghosh knew that this was tradition, that in the rural Egypt, Imam and other religious figures are often associated with those two professions. And the narrator decides to meet the Imam, and as he comes to the village of Imam, and as he tries to meet him, he finds that Imam is not very welcoming in nature. And Ghosh says that Imam was a big man with bright brown eyes, set deep in a wrinkled and weather beaten face. And he was distinctly untidy, except for his neatly cut beard. And interviewing the Imam, the narrator comes to know that he had divorced his first wife and the second had left him, and now he lived all alone. And as he gets to know more about the traditional medicine from Imam, he seems to dismiss that idea. And he says that he no longer practiced the old tradition of herbal medicine, but rather he had this injection which he gave to anyone who came to him with any kind of disease. So that suggests a kind of conflict the Imam faces between the tradition and the modern kind of medicine. He feels that the traditional medicine no longer has any importance for the people in the village except for the old people. So he decides to move uh, along with the time but not an updated kind of medical treatment. So after his meeting with the Imam, the narrator meets Kamis the rat, and we come to know that his surname is Sudan. He's almost the age of the narrator. And the people, along with Kamis and he himself, asks a lot of doubts to the narrator regarding the customs in India, specifically that of burning the dead and worshipping cows. And Ghosh replied that it's true that some people in his country burn the dead body and worship cows as it was traditional custom. And the people of this particular village, they find it difficult to uh, accept that kind of custom that is in India. And then, after a lot of talk with the villagers, clearing their doubts very calmly, narrator gets to meet the Imam once more under the request of Khamis the rat, because Khamis wanted Imam to come to his home and treat his ill wife. But he was not brave enough to ask the Imam to visit him at his house. So the narrator, or the so called Indian doctor, takes up that responsibility and moves to ask him. Now, this is when the Imam and the narrator get into a heated argument, and they start talking a lot about how the West is superior. Even Imam talks about the customs in India as barbaric in nature. He says that people should not burn the dead, and he finds it disgusting to be worshipping cows in the place of gods. So, after this heated argument, when things seem to be going out of hand, Khamis and his friends come and take the narrator away. So, that is basically the plot that we find in the title essay. Here, as we said earlier, we find the intolerance towards other cultures, especially the people of that particular village in Egypt. They find it either ridiculous, or um, they find it demeaning to accept the customs of India. So we find that there is a cultural conflict, there is an ethnic conflict that happens between the people of Egypt and this narrator who goes there for his studies. The villagers of Alexandria find it actually difficult to believe that the people in India burn their dead or they worship cows. So, no matter how much ever the narrator tries to accept the villagers in Egypt as they are, he feels that he cannot take it any longer. He feels that it is difficult uh, to make them understand that every culture has its own value. The next important thing that we need to understand from this text is the Eurocentric attitude of both Imam and the narrator. We find that the West has had a great influence on both the Egyptians and the Indians, and they believe that all things Western are superior. That is why Imam, why the argument is going on, Imam says that the people in the West never burn their dead, and that throughout his argument we feel that he is taking the West as a role model. So we find that kind of Eurocentric attitude in the Imam. Now, it is also important to remember that the school teacher once told the narrator that the Imam was a well read person. He used to read a lot. So, we find it quite surprising to know that he is not at all open about the things that happen in India, and he is so prejudiced uh, about the cultural system, the customs in India, and he exhibits that prejudice blatantly on the narrator. Another thing is that we find Imam as a representative of tradition who is slowly trying to move on to the modern customs, and we find the narrator as a representative of modernity. So there is this conflict between Imam and the narrator who find it difficult to totally understand the culture of each other. Imam's refusal to acquaint the narrator of his traditional healing process is perhaps for the reason that old customs are not trusted anymore. So, according to the Imam, the customs and traditions which constitute his own identity, his own community and nation has become obsolete. So, he feels that he has the right to question the customs and traditions of other people and other places. So, being a victim of the attack on his traditional knowledge and traditional medicines, he takes it as his right to attack the people with other belief systems or other cultures. He feels that it is his right to attack them as well. Another major theme that we find here is the cultural confluence in that village itself. The narrator seems to be surprised to find people with a lot of exposure in that small village. He kind of makes a metaphor and says that they are like the airline passengers in a transit lounge. I quote from the text. He says that the men of the village had all the busy restlessness of airline passengers in a transit lounge. Many of them had worked and traveled in the sheikdoms of the Persian Gulf. Others had been in Libya and Jordan and Syria. Some had been to Yemen and as soldiers, others to Saudi Arabia as pilgrims. A few had visited Europe. Some of them had passports so thick they opened out like ink blackened concertinas. And none of this was new. Their grandparents and ancestors and relatives had traveled and migrated too, in much the same way as mine had in the Indian subcontinents, because of wars or for money or job, and or perhaps simply because they got tired of living always in one place. You could read the history of this restlessness in the villagers' surnames. They had names which derived from cities in the Levant, from Turkey, from faraway towns in Nubia. It was as though people had drifted here from every corner of the Middle East. The wanderlust of its founders had been ploughed into the soil of the village. It seemed to me sometimes that every man in it was a traveler. Unquote. So here, he finds this cultural confluence. He finds this abundance of cultural exposure in that single village in Alexandria. From the names that these people have inherited uh, and the wanderlust nature of the ancestors of these people, he believes that uh, such people who have had some kind of exposure should be open enough to accept other people. Now, this is quite contradictory. This he finds quite contradictory. People who have come from different lands, people who have been to different lands, are unable to accept and appreciate the cultures of other places. We also find a few allusions here with regard to the Imam. Uh, the narrator says that the villagers did not give him much credit because the older people in the village expected the Imam to be a person who has had his studies in Al Azhar University in Cairo, Egypt, or they expected the Imam to speak and behave like certain political activists like Jamal al-Din al-Afghani or Muhammad Abdu. Uh, so they expected him to be that kind of an extreme activist, which he could not. And the young people, they wanted people who was full of energy and full of passion for their Islam religion. So, with regard to this, there are a few allusions which are made in the text. So, to conclude, Amitav Ghosh tries to present before us the plight of an Indian or the difficulties that an Indian faces when he or she moves out of the native land. The people of other places might find it funny or they might find it ridiculous to accept the customs that the Indians have. As I conclude, I would like to bring our attention to the essay, The Eternal Silence of the Infinite Crowd, written by Neeraj C. Chowdhury, where he talks about how Indians are more open in nature, how Indians are ready to accept people who come to their homeland, whereas the Englishmen, they are more reserved. They don't open up to others. So similarly, here also we find a similar situation where the narrator, the Indian, seems to be more open about the world around him, but the Imam and the other people in Egypt uh, seems to be quite closed with regard to their acceptance of customs and traditions of people from other lands. I hope you will read the essay once more and we'll have further discussion in the class. Thank you.